The following example is again against Taimanov, this time in the Palma de Mallorca Indizonal 1970. And it's black to move in the 14th move, so just this critical moment before the time control. Where to go with the rook b7? It should go to c7, so that knight d7 is still possible to create a dark square blockade on the queen side with good drawing chances. While after rook b7, Bobby played, after rook d7, rook b5. Taimanov's idea was, which he also sealed, rook d4, and now Bobby had all the time in the world to analyze the adjourned game and found that c5 is very dangerous and introduces a lot of dynamics into White's queenside initiative. For example, g3 would be completely wrong, of course. Now black has very good counterplay, even against White's king. c5 is very strong, as the h-pawn is not important. Black's pawns are too far behind, and White's queenside majority is extremely dangerous, of course. And here comes a very difficult moment. What would you do? Bobby had, of course, analyzed it thoroughly in his adjournment analysis. Rook b3 or rook takes b4. And this is objectively extremely difficult. Bobby's decision might be right, at least from the practical point of view. But rook b3 also is very critical. Then Taimanov gives the following more or less forced variation. Yeah, White must of course keep his strong bishop. With drawing chances, according to Mark Taimanov, Kasparov continues it in his On My Great Predecessors work. Yeah, with practical drawing chances. But of course it's still extremely difficult to say. White is better, but okay. Black's king is now active, and the disadvantage of this variation from White's point of view is that it is easier to play for black. This might be another point why Fischer took and played rook c4. Here the bishop is much stronger than the knight, as the outside passed a-pawn is extremely dangerous. Black's pawns are very slow, and White can also activate the king. But here comes another inaccuracy. King g7 is wrong, but I cannot say if Black can defend this with other moves. White has all the chances to win over the board, at least. But this somehow is too slow. Now White should be winning, as the a-pawn has gained another tempo. And rook e1 stops the activation of Black's rook and prepares in case rook a1, in case if needed. Okay, Taimanov forces it. And now, yeah, of course, now comes the king. And this is important in variations like this. Then the king is in time to dominate the knight, which is often important. And then White should be winning, as his play on the queen side is too quick. Black's kingside pawns are too slow, and the bishop is a much better piece in this fight in two wings. But in the game, Taimanov tried 98, but he was also too slow, as now his rook is too clumsily placed. The rook is not a good blockading force, of course. It is now dominated, and White is always in time to win. But okay, a few precise moves are still needed. Domination, very important. And only now the king can come. Knight check shadow, and the king is now just in time to help the White's forces win. And the last move of the game was king b5. King takes b4 would spoil it. Now the knight can come and it's a draw. But after king b5, Taimanov resigned, as the knight can come, but White's attack strikes first. And the king comes to b6. to deliver this disruptive check, and then white will win both black's pieces first and the game later. Again, a really instructive demonstration of Bobby's power play with his favorite material configuration in the endgame, rook and light squared bishop against rook and knight. And yeah, here there can only be two results. White wins or it's a draw. And yeah, after king g7, white should be winning, as now he's won further time, which is of course very critical in such a race situation. But after other moves, white has very good practical winning chances, but theoretically it might not be 100% clear. Again, a beautiful power play demonstration by Bobby. It is very amazing that Bobby even managed to win this position against Taimanov in their candidates match. It was the second game, but it's already the second adjournment, and it was only played after Taimanov had traumatically lost the third game. And so this gave him the final blow somehow. As usually, the Soviet analysis of adjourned games was extremely good, and black somehow can't lose here. Tal is even quoted as saying that I, and not only I, would not have played on in this position, whatever the tournament situation. It is a pure waste of time. But Fischer plays on to the bare kings. Yeah, and of course, Bobby doesn't risk anything by playing on here with white. Okay, for the moment, everything is fine for Taimanov. And now he has a decision. What to do? And it's probably easier to trade down the rook endgame, especially as it was adjournment analysis. And here we have a book draw. Either the pawn endgame is drawn, or the king can cross over in front of the g-pawn, and then it's completely drawn, of course. So the rook ending would have been probably the better practical decision. As with the minor pieces, white still has some practical chances to create problems. But okay, now there's this series of checks, and the only real way to escape it is to offer a rook exchange. And this, of course, also leads to a drawn position. But now black has 3 drawing moves, and Taimanov played king e4, which loses. What would you prefer? King d4 and king d6 draw, but maybe easiest is knight d3 to emphasize the fact that white doesn't have the queening square of the rook's pawn, so that the knight can even be sacrificed if the king manages to reach the saving corner in time, which is the case here. And so this is probably easiest from a practical point of view. But in the game, Taimanov chose king e4. If something goes wrong, then somehow everything goes wrong. Bobby found the only winning move. Can you do the same? Bishop c8, and it's over. The bishop leaves the sphere of influence of the knight, and now black is just not in time. Really amazing. Yeah, after knight g4 check, Bobby would have played king g7, and then white is winning. And it doesn't matter here that the bishop doesn't control the queening square of the rook's pawn, but the rook's pawn is the most dangerous enemy of the knight. This does count. So Taimanov tries to stop it on h7, but Fischer stops this plan. And nothing can be done. Zugzwang, the typical weapon against the knight. And then now it's a real nightmare for Taimanov. And so he resigned. Yeah, it's really amazing how Bobby managed to win these endgames with rook and light squared bishop against rook and knight. Okay, this should be a draw, of course, but yeah, just play on, and the practical problems are never to be underestimated, even in such an adjourned game. And Bobby had a lot of energy and always fought to the end, and here it was yeah, good that he exhausted Taimanov by continuing to play. And yeah, this was the reason why he could win the match in the end with 6-0.